Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us. My name is Sergio. I'm the handler for Mayday's Doomed to Repeat campaign. And with me, as always, and this isn't even really a joke this time, the newest published author of Delta Green content, it's Black Project Gaming's Vince. Congratulations, pal.
Oh man, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate that. For anyone unaware, in the latest scenario collection, Dead Drops, Arc Dream published a profile I wrote discussing the Airforce Office of Special Investigations. A huge honor, huge privilege to be included in this. And in this episode, we're actually going to be talking to Shane Ivey about the scenario collection, his experience as a publisher, and how I got involved. We've also prepped a segment I'm calling The Guns of Delta Green, where we will break down what players and handlers need to know to effectively roleplay experienced firearms specialists.
So much fun stuff to talk about. If you enjoy the show, make sure to like and subscribe, leave a review for us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or leave a comment below. Now, you might think that it is impossible to combine the titles of every scenario found within Dead Drops. But in the presence of Jack Frost, Meridian emerged from the dust, a victim of the art, a victim who found the dead drop. You see what I did there, Vince?
Hard not to. Absolutely brilliant. Well played, sir. Well played.
Got to contribute where I can.
Love it. Now, let's get down to business. Our very special guest today has worked for Pagan Publishing and then later revived the magazine The Unspeakable Oath in 2010, edited and published games including Monsters and Other Childish Things, Wild Talents, Puppet Land, and Better Angels, contributed to several books for Cubicle 7's The One Ring, co-wrote Delta Green the Roleplaying Game, and has co-wrote and published over 34 books in the award-winning Delta Green line. The publisher and managing editor of Arc Dream Publishing, the one, the only, Shane Ivey. Nice to have you on, sir.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, Shane, I do have to point out that there is an elephant in the room, which is that our show, which started about a year ago, is called The Dead Drop, and you just released a scenario collection called Dead Drops. Is this just a coincidence, or is this your way of signaling you're a big fan of the show?
Oh, yeah. Mostly coincidence, unfortunately. There's only so many kind of ominous-sounding trade-crafty phrases out there, so pretty soon we're going to have to start recycling them, or come up with some that are really stretches.
Well, speaking of these collections, there's been A Night at the Opera, there's been Control Group, Black Sites, and now Dead Drops. Could you talk to us about the decision-making process that goes into choosing which scenarios should go together in a collection like this?
Oh, there's virtually no process at all. We basically, when we discover that we've published enough standalone scenarios that aren't going somewhere else, then it occurs to us, we could put those in a book, and we put them in a book. So, a Victim of the Art, for instance, we originally, up until about 3 months ago, we had Dead Drops laid out, perfectly squared away, and then somebody asked about a Victim of the Art, and it wasn't until then that I realized we'd never even put that in a collection, so I kind of got our layout artist to shoehorn that in at the last minute. So I think now we're all caught up on our published scenarios being collected. But
I had a feeling that was going to be your answer.
It's very ad hoc, yeah.
Love it. Yeah, and I guess that kind of answers the question then. Is there really a running theme that you perceive between these scenarios? I'm guessing not.
Not usually, no. And on the standalone ones, no. We tend to be very driven by just whatever occurs to us as at the moment as seeming interesting and awesome and weird.
Well, I suppose you could say A Night at the Opera was all about scenarios that work well as opening scenarios for campaigns and whatnot.
Yeah. And again, that wasn't a plan. That was the first, 4 or 5 adventures that we published for the role-playing game. So I think it was kind of inevitable that a lot of them have kind of an easy way into playing.
All right, so the scenario collections have absolutely no order or sense to them whatsoever, but what about the cover design? Now, there's very specific art for all of these collections. What's the process when you're designing the cover art?
Nothing. I just take whatever Dennis draws, and if I think it could maybe be improved, then I'll say something. But that's maybe one book out of 10. He has good instincts, so most of the time we just take what he uses and put it on a book. And then when we put it on the cover and we have to put the logo on and all those elements, there's about half the time he has to sort of redraw it or add to it or something like that, because it needs to come, the main body of the image needs to come down about 2 inches that he didn't remember to add. But yeah, it's the process is just, hey, we're going to need a cover for this book. Okay.
So Dead Drops, just like you just said, you said we need a cover, and this is what he gave you.
Yeah, again, we kind of work. We most of the time just work from inspiration more than planning, and spoiler alert: the cover for Dead Drops has nothing whatsoever to do with any scenario inside it.
Well, there goes another question we were going to ask. That's good to know.
There's been a lot
it made me think maybe it needs another adventure that's about, the giant thing coming up out of the ocean, but God, that would be a lot of work. So let's just leave it a mystery.
Right. It does kind of speak to, we have spoken to Dennis before, and he has mentioned that you guys are very in sync about what Delta Green is, and maybe this is an example of, you don't even have to talk about it. It just works.
Yeah. I mean, me and Dennis and John Tynes and Scott Clancy, we've all been working on this for so long that it's kind of second nature, so we've developed a lot of shorthands that, don't require a lot of conversation or socializing or human interaction.
Well, then I have to ask about a certain section of Dead Drops, which is that Vince is involved with it. He was able to write a section about it. How did that participation come about?
Yeah, I think Vince might remember more than me, but I think it was maybe I had mentioned something about OSI, Airforce OSI on social media or something, and was thinking that was something we'd never really covered, even though it plays kind of a large part in the lore of Delta Green when you start digging. And if I remember right, I heard from him, and he said he had some knowledge of that, and if we wanted him to put something together, then he could take a crack at it. And I said, yeah, by all means, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, it worked out really well. I believe that's essentially what happened. Is OSI had been mentioned somewhere, and I was like, hey, by the way, I have this thing written, because I'd written the profile up at that point.
Okay, awesome.
And I was just like, hey, you want to take a look? And you were like, yeah, this is great. And he came back to me, and I think we bounced some feedback back and forth, but there was very few changes. And then he came back and we're like, yeah, we're going to go ahead and include this in something. I'm like, oh, well, shit. Okay. So, yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah. It was great. It was a terrific write-up. So that was maybe if you want extra bragging rights, that was maybe the one time in history that somebody wrote something on spec for Delta Green and we actually used it. So well done.
That's awesome. That's a feather in the cap for sure.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Digging into it a little bit more, why, if you could go into detail, Shane, as to why you thought it was important to include this Airforce OSI information.
Oh yeah, sure. So the one of the oldest parts of Delta Green's fictional background is, of course, the big, sprawling, majestic UFO conspiracy in the U.S. government, and a part of that is the sort of infamous Men in Black, who before Will Smith made them funny, they were this sort of creepy government agents that people said showed up at their doors and said, I'm with the government, and never said who they were with, and threatened all kind of sorrow and mayhem if they didn't shut up about UFOs. So in the Delta Green history, there's a version of all of that that's real, and the Men in Black tend to work out of they work out of as bureaucratic cover. They work out of like the National Reconnaissance Office, but since the NRO's activities are so super secret, that's like, the first layer of cover, and then the cover above that is usually Air Force Office of Special Investigations, because it's a comparatively very small outfit, and it has a lot of, from my perspective anyway, fairly easy tie-in to what the NRO is doing, so you can sort of explain it away. And it also, they're federal law enforcement investigators, so they potentially have access to a lot of stuff that other federal agencies are up to. And then if you want to layer above that, they usually pretend they're with the FBI or something like that, just like, Delta Green sometimes does. But OSI always was sort of there at a sort of percolating at a low level across all of these events. And it has its own part in real world UFO kook conspiracy theories, right? And along the same lines. So it was just sort of a natural that we ought to cover it, but I don't think we ever had. So so it was very cool. And when I initially started doing some digging on my own to put together sort of an overview of how OSI worked back in the 90s for a scenario. And when I was doing that, I was able, through a lot of Googling, this was a couple of years ago, so Google still works, but through a lot of Googling of, what are the different components of OSI and what do they actually do? And that was actually really hard to discover because it's not covered as much as all the really well-known federal agencies. So, I got the most fun information I got was from things like PDF flyers and brochures and stuff that OSI supervisors had made to explain to newcomers what each of the departments did, and the stuff that wasn't classified, right? But nobody ever sees it. So anyway, so I kind of discovered all that and found a lot of really interesting things there. And then when I talked to Vince, he had all the context in the world, so it was awesome.
That's awesome,
man. Yeah, that was a lot of fun to work on. And not to beat the dead horse anymore, but like when you look at other federal agencies, right? You look at the Bureau, you look at NCIS. I mean, there's just such a wealth of information out there, and OSI by comparison is relatively small. But in the world of Delta Green, with Majestic and, like you said, the UFO cover-ups projects, all that stuff, it is such an outsized organization with that much more influence. Right. So yeah, I'm glad I was able to help with
the fact that it's so small makes it fun. As a GM, it makes it fun to include players, because I can tell them, okay, you're with the OSI, and they immediately start thinking, oh, woo. So I'm like, you're one of 3 agents in this 4-state area of the U.S. of its Air Force bases or something like that, and you can sort of see their dreams of glory start to crumble a little bit.
Yeah. Can you give us any perspective on, now with your decades plus experience with publishing independently, what is it like for independent publishers? What are the realities of being what you guys are in Arc Dream?
It's risky if you're not really careful, as with starting any business. And there are a lot of decisions that you have to be able to make and stick to that a lot of people don't like making, right? So the things that we've had to learn the hard way are things like minimizing the number of people involved. When we do a new project, we don't try to reach out and bring in everybody that we know. Like for instance, when you do that, you raise the risk sort of, I don't know, maybe it's exponentially because each risk multiplies by the other risks, but you raise the risk of things getting delayed, right? Because if you're bringing in 10 people who are all planning on doing a very small chunk, then that small chunk is going to be very low priority for every one of those 10 people. So you have a much higher chance for any one of them to have something come up that they can't deliver, or they can't deliver on time, or they deliver something and it turns out to be not what you need, and you have to shift, reassign it or whatever. All of which means that your time scale can really, really go long. Now, we're certainly nobody to lecture anyone about delivering books on time, but our delays are for other reasons entirely. And if we for instance exacerbated that, right, by having a really large stable of contributors for every single book, then God help us, we would never publish anything.
I'll say, as a consumer, is something Arc Dream, I think, has really excelled in is generating and keeping good faith with its fan base, and that if there is going to be a delay, we know that the end product is going to 800% be worth that delay. With every other small publisher, it's a roll of the dice, right? Sometimes you're going to get these astronomical delays, and you'll still end up with a subpar product. I'll speak for myself, but I'm sure, Serge, you feel the same way. We know that if there is a delay, the product that's eventually going to come out from Arc Dream is going to be freaking incredible. So the delays are worth it, and we appreciate
Serge, you don't have to agree with that. I won't take it personally.
I'm a little spoiled as a Delta Green fan because I joined very late. You guys already did the Kickstarter. The initial books were out, so I kind of joined once the ball was rolling. So I haven't quite experienced, only now, some of those delays. But I don't care. I love reading the books over and over again.
Yep, well, thank absolutely. You. That's fun. That's always fun to hear.
Yeah,
and that's not entirely a coincidence. To some extent, that's always been something that we've worked really hard on. In accounting terms, it's building the value of the goodwill of your product or your company, right?
Yes.
But in more human terms, number one, we like being honest with people better than lying to people.
Yeah.
And we like it better when people are honest with us than when they lie to us. So we just do try to do it, and it helps that we all work extraordinarily hard to deliver something that nobody besides us is likely to be able to deliver.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
That's not claiming that it's necessarily better than what anybody else is doing, but there's a reason there's so few of us that we bring in to write for Delta Green on a regular basis. It kind of has its own very particular themes and approaches and demands, and we've got a team that are all pretty good at doing that, and also developing a thick enough skin to not go crazy when they get something that goes way off base and everybody else has to say, hey, that part was kind of stupid. Maybe make it less stupid. Which all of us have done. And
oh yeah.
A healthy discourse at Arc Dream. That's good.
Healthy discourse. There we go. Of the scenarios you have written, Shane, any of them that stand out to you as a favorite, and if so, why?
Oh yeah, I think my favorite is probably still Observer Effect.
Freaking great scenario.
Yeah, that's one of the first ones. It may have been the first one that I wrote for the role-playing game proper.
Nice.
Funny enough, that I've said before, I think, that on an interview, but that. I first had the idea for that because Pinnacle, the people that do Savage Worlds, they were planning a horror scenario anthology, and we were drumming up the RPG, and so I talked to the guys and I said, well, how about I put together like a Savage Worlds thing that's about Delta Green, and then maybe that'll rope in some of the Savage Worlds players, and it's a good scenario. And so I started putting it together. and it just, like ran way past their deadline, and they fired me from that project, rightly so, and continued on, and it went on without observer effect. But that freed it up for us to do it right, as a Delta Green thing. So yeah, I love that scenario because it feels weird, and the pacing of it is kind of strange, and there's a lot of elements that creep people out, and there's a little bit of this Groundhog Day thing going on in it that I think consistently it sort of ratchets up tension and suspense and a kind of sense of stakes that and then also kind of forces you to sort of experience some of the weird traumatic things over and over again, but worse, right? So I don't know. There's a lot going on in that adventure that I'm really happy with how it all came out.
And time travel stuff is hard to do on tabletop, so it's a huge success when you can manage to make it work like it does in Observer Effect.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's in Observer Effect. It's very constrained. It's very limited, and you don't have any options of like, well, let's go back only, let's go back 4 days instead of 2 or whatever like that. It's something that's happening to the player characters, not something that they're involved in, which I think helps a lot in skipping over all of those particular pitfalls that you can run into with the time travel adventure.
Now, Shane, after writing so many scenarios, what do you find inspires you or draws one out of you? What's that inspirational process like for you?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just read a lot and read the news a lot, and I'm interested in things that I don't understand very well, right? Like really advanced science, physics, and astrophysics, and ancient history, and the ways in which people over the span of human history have tried to understand the world and things in the world that they couldn't understand, right? Before we had science, we had faith, we had animism, we had this sense that the world itself is something that's alive in ways that you can't see, except when a whirlwind starts over there out of nothing, or when a thunderstorm hits. All of which was incredibly potent, and people have always been sort of desperate to figure out what's going on. Why is this happening? So, anyway, so I read a lot about things like that, and I try to sort of stay sensitive to potential weirdness, and potentially weird connections that can form from, one whatever story to another. So, I mean, you don't have to read too many articles about physics or biology before advances in them, before things crop up that are going to strike you as being really weird. And what if that particular thing went a little wrong, and oh shit, that would be bad, wouldn't it? And so, I mean, observer effect, right? That came out entirely because way back when I was reading some news stories about a physics hypothesis, and that had to do with the idea that the universe that we experience might be, according to the hypothesis, might, in the big picture, be a sort of a hologram projected into 3 dimensions from a reality that had more dimensions than that. Anyway, it all came about because of that, right? There were experiments that had to do with that, like this. They were using these like super finely calibrated lasers to look for changes in gravity that, if they happened at certain intervals or whatever, might correlate with this. It was all kinds of that stuff coming together, and and so I was just sort of thinking about that and found it fascinating, whether it was right or not, and thinking about it through the lens of, okay, what if also the universe was kind of alive and hungry and hated us, and it got kind of dark.
Now, various Delta Green related Patreons, yours when it was active, Dead Channels I think has a little bit, and then now the overall Delta Green Patreon, they've released some updated or modified rules for the game. The 2 that come to mind are like the blooding combat rules, and then the revised skills, revised professions. How has community feedback been to those, and do you foresee releasing new like modified rule sets in the future?
Yeah, I mean, the feedback is usually great. Whether it's positive or negative, it's great. Because it's useful. And those things we can experiment, and we get a wild hair, we can just do it and put it out there and say, hey, this seems fun. Is it fun? And people can tell us what they think. So it's super, super useful. And yeah, some of that will wind up making its way into an eventual second edition of the game. I feel like it's kind of overdue for a second edition because, I could put a second edition of the game together now if we wanted to sink the time into it, because we've been paying attention to the things that it needs to do better all along. But it'll be a while. I feel like we probably ought to have the original Delta Green Kickstarter done and out of the door before we tell people we've got a second edition for the game that they're still waiting on getting all of their awards for. So
that's fair.
It's not going to be imminent, but yeah. I'm looking forward to it because there's the more it goes on, there's all kinds of stuff in there that I've wound up sort of changing in my own games at home that I feel like improve play a lot, right? But it's a little much to try to put it out there as supplementary options for the existing game. Right. That gets really confusing really fast, and none of it's like game breaking. It's not like people haven't had a great time playing the existing game for all these years. So we don't have an urgent need to fix things, but when we get around to it, I think it'll be an even stronger game.
And I assume as long as the sales of the scenario releases and all these other things are still strong, it feels like there's no rush,
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Shane, it was a real pleasure to talk to you. We are really enjoying kind of going down the list of all the Arc Dream contributors and talking to each one of you. We appreciate your time and all of your insights that you have to offer.
Yeah, my pleasure. Who's next on your list? Do you know?
We've got Dennis. We've got you. We should speak to John's. The gentleman who's creating Pisces. I get Steins and him.
Scott Glancy.
Scott Glancy.
We should probably speak to him next.
Yeah.
Yep. Shane, this has been great, man. Thanks for sitting with us. Thanks for chatting with us.
Oh, sure.
Always a pleasure. We'll have you back on again soon, and hopefully next time as a gamer. So,
that'd be a blast. I'd love it.
Yeah. All right, let's do it.
All right.
Thanks again, Shane. Vince, tell me, what is better than fighting eldritch abominations in a desperate bid to save the world?
How about doing it with big fuck-off guns?
Hell yeah! Well, maybe we should first preface this discussion with a small disclaimer. Yep. Guys, firearms are no joke, and the information you are about to hear is not meant to encourage anyone to touch a firearm unless they have gone through the proper training.
Absolutely. Many government employees carry firearms and have years upon years of training. So this is meant to just be a primer for players and handlers that will lend to role-playing someone who is used to handling and using these things in the field.
Now, I know that when discussing something as dangerous as a firearm, the first thing you really need to talk about is basic safety, right, Vince?
100%. The first thing we're going to cover, as we do with all discussions involving firearms, even if we're not necessarily handling them physically, are the 4 rules of firearm safety. These are the pinnacle of every interaction you, your character, anyone will have when interacting with these dangerous items. Number 1, treat every weapon as if it's loaded. Full stop. Doesn't matter if you know that 3 minutes ago somebody unloaded it, something could have changed in that interim. We see this with unfortunate and tragic incidents like with the Rush shooting. That weapon was not treated like it was loaded. Right. So until you can verify and definitively prove for yourself otherwise, every weapon needs to be treated as if it is currently loaded. Secondly, never point your weapon at anything you do not intend to kill. That is what a firearm is designed to do. It is designed to kill. Don't point that muzzle at anything that you do not intend to destroy. Keep your finger off the trigger until your sights are aligned and on your intended target and the decision to fire has been made. No reason your booger hook should be on the bang switch unless you plan on employing that firearm to potentially take somebody else's life.
Right.
And finally, because bullets have a tendency to just keep going, know what is in front of, know what is behind, and know what is to the sides of your target. So once again, treat every weapon as if it's loaded. Never point your weapon at anything you don't intend to kill. Keep your finger off the trigger until the decision to fire has been made and your sights are on target, and then know what is in front of, behind, and to the sides of your target.
For the role players in the audience, obviously this means your character is not going to be willy-nilly moving their gun around. I mean, your character is going to treat it like the way samurais did back in those old black and white movies. When they remove that weapon, it means they have intention to kill, and so some seriousness needs to be placed upon that.
Amen. Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right, so moving on to the ammunition of these firearms. If you were to show me a bullet, I don't think I could tell you whether it was a .22 or a .223. Can we talk about the differences between ammunition and how they work?
Oh man, do I have a slide for you. Buckle up. All right, so here we go. Let's talk about handgun rounds. On this slide, you're going to see most of the common handgun rounds and even some uncommon ones. The 5.7 FN being a good example. I don't see a lot of that. But these are your typical handgun rounds, especially the ones that you're going to encounter in the guns that we have in Delta Green, right? And then on the very right, you're going to see a 5.56, a 5.56 NATO rifle round. So you can kind of see in comparison what the sizes are. But you've got your 9mm, you've got your 40 Smith & Wesson, your 45 automatic Colt pistol ACP. Pretty much the main differences between these are going to be the size of the casing, right? The amount of propellant that's used, the amount of powder that's used, and the size of the actual bullet itself, the grainage, the weight, and how big this fuck-off bullet is going to be when it hits you and it transfers all of that kinetic energy into somebody's person. But these are your pistol rounds.
And to be clear, not all of these rounds work in every gun, right? Like there are very specific guns for these bullets.
Correct. Yeah. Every handgun is chambered for a different caliber, right? So you can't necessarily shoot, a 10 millimeter round through a 9 millimeter pistol and vice versa, because the magazines are going to be different. The barrel is going to be different. The recoil system, the springs, the guide rod is going to be different. There's a lot of actual mechanical differences that go into that. The one exception I will say is when you're dealing with 38 Special and 357 Magnum, in some cases, especially with revolvers, they can fire both because they're pretty similar rounds for the most part. But yeah, you're not going to be firing 45 out of a 9mm. Not going to happen. Now, when we talk about shotguns, especially 12 gauge, there are two types of rounds that are mentioned in the Delta Green guide. We're not going to get into birdshot and everything else. For the most part, you're going to be dealing with buckshot, which is the one you can see here on the left. All of those little pellets are up there in that cartridge. And then you've got slug. Slug is essentially just a big fuck off plug of metal that is going to come out of that shotgun really, really fast. Most police departments issue those to be used to shoot engine blocks, to disable vehicles. Yeah, so those are going to fuck you up. 9 times out of 10, you're going to win that rap battle. So slugs are awesome, but very, very devastating. But now, Moving on to our rifle rounds on our next slide here, these are all the various some of the varieties of rifle rounds that you're going to see in, your carbines, your light rifles, all up to your heavy rifles, right? And again, you can see some similarities, but some differences in the size of the casing, the amount of propellant and powder used. 5.56 is the most common one, but then you've got 7.62, you've got 300 blackout, all of these. This is just to kind of give you as a player an idea as to what do these bullets look like? When I'm loading a magazine, what kind, what's the size of bullet that I'm putting in there? What size of bullet am I using against my target? It's all just context, right? Context and flavor. And then on that final slide, you can see some of your really heavy, what we call anti-personnel rounds all the way there on the left. Your 338 Lapua and your 50 BMG.
That's anti-personnel or anti-vehicle? Those bullets are huge.
They call them anti-personnel, but yeah, you use those to take out vehicles for the most part. I mean, yeah, you can use them. You can certainly use them on people, but yeah, that's
there won't be much people left, I think, once you're done with that.
No, those tend to do their job very, very, very well. But now we've talked about casing, propellant, powder, all that stuff. Let's get into ammunition anatomy a little bit. What goes into a round? So you've got, a bullet, which is going to be your projectile. In some of those slides, that'll be that copper piece at the very top. Then you've got your casing, which is where it rests. And within that casing, you've got propellant. You've got a primer, which is what the firing pin will strike. And then you've got the rim of the bullet itself. And so that's essentially how that works. It's all just essentially firing pin will strike that primer. That'll ignite the propellant inside the casing. And that very violent exothermic reaction, that explosion for all intents and purposes, is going to force that projectile out of that casing really fucking fast. So, and that's where you get your velocity from.
Got it. So what's hitting people is just what's at the tip of those bullets.
What's just at the tip. And then the casing, that brass part, is what's ejected out of the weapon.
All right, well, this is a lot of good information on ammunition, but it does feel like there's even more options when it comes to the actual firearms themselves. What should we know about these different types of guns?
Yeah, so what I did was I took the examples that were featured in the Agent's Handbook, and I just found examples of those and populated these slides with them. So we'll start with your light pistols. You've got your 22 long rifle, your 32 ACP, 380, 38. You can go back and reference that previous slide to see what those look like. But your common variants are going to be your Smith & Wesson Model 36, also known as the Chief Special or revolver there, or your Walther PPK. I'll be honest with you, these in today's day and age, in 2024, very few people are carrying these calibers and these types of weapons simply because they underperform. They're not useless, but with the continued evolution of ballistics and mankind's ingenious ability to find ways, better ways to kill each other, these are simply obsolete in a lot of ways. Not dead by any stretch of the imagination, but there are better options out there. But now we'll get into medium pistols. These are going to be your workhorses, right? And speaking from a practical standpoint and from a real-world operational standpoint, you really have no reason to go beyond these calibers unless you're just one of those people who's ate up about bigger bullets, right? All law enforcement agencies, federal law enforcement agencies, issue these calibers and these weapons and these calibers. These are your workhorses. These are your average day-to-day guns, specifically 9mm. Again, the improvements in modern day ballistics have ensured that the 9mm is really like a pinnacle round. It is good at what it does. It may not drop them in one shot like a frickin' 44 Magnum will, but you've got more rounds. You've got less recoil, which means a more manageable weapon, which means easier follow-up shots, and a proven track record of being effective, especially at this point. These days, most special operations forces in the military carry Glock 19s, which is chambered in 9mm. There's a very good reason for that. It fucking works.
Yeah.
Some still use 1911s. We'll go over that style of pistol that fires a 45, but those are increasingly less and less used, simply just because 9mm gets the job done. So anyway, that's to stop all you edgelords in the comments who want to get into a caliber discussion.
Because we have so many edgelords in the comments giving us grief about it.
Yeah, I don't fucking know. Listen, this is going to go on YouTube, man. We know how that works.
True.
But so your types of rounds are going to be your 9mm, your 40 Smith & Wesson, and your 45 ACP. Funny story about 40 Smith & Wesson, that started off as the 10mm round, which we'll cover in the next couple slides. But, because the FBI had been involved in a really, really awful shootout where some of its agents were killed, and so they wanted a better performing round. They tried to go to the 10mm from the 9mm, I believe, and because of the size of the round and the amount of recoil, their agents just couldn't handle it. Accuracy went out the window, and so they went to Smith & Wesson and developed the 40, which is really just, they call it the 40 short and weak, just because it is a smaller, kind of more manageable version of the 10mm.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, I digress. Your common types are going to be your Beretta 92 FS, also known as the M9, your Colt M1911A1, Glock 17, Glock 22. So all Glocks look the same, so that's why I just have the 19 up there. That is probably the most common and probably the best combat pistol out of the box out of all of these. The Glock 19 is the staple. The Glock 19, the current model, the Gen 5, is a great pistol. I think most, if not, well, not all, but most are using that pistol these days, especially, again, the military. The Beretta, that was the standard issue sidearm for the U.S. military. They recently went to a Sig Sauer pistol. When I was in, I hated the Beretta. It's dog shit. The 1911 is great. It's high maintenance. It's a very high maintenance pistol. You've got to really keep that thing clean and keep it lubricated, keep it moving. The Glock varietals, we'll just call them, all the different Glocks out there, they call them lawnmower guns, because you can leave them out in the rain, you can oil them once a year, and they're probably still going to shoot just as good as the day you got it. They're really, really good.
Interesting.
Next, we got our shotguns. The big two are going to be your Mossberg Model 500, your Remington Model 870. These are just pump action. You pull the trigger, fire, rack it. It's going to chamber another round. That's how they work. They're devastating. They're really easy to shoot. They fire a lot of little rounds at once, and they're very, very good at what they do. If I could carry any gun in Delta Green as a player, it'd probably be a shotgun, because it works out really, really well. But of course, you can't engage at distance. Right. Which actually brings us to light rifles or carbines. These are going to be kind of like the medium pistols, where your workhorses for the handgun arena. The light rifles or carbines are going to be your workhorse for the long gun variety, right? Your types of rounds, you got 5.45 by 39mm. It's a Soviet round, and you got your 5.56 NATO. Common types are going to be your AR-15, your Colt M4, your FN Scar L or Scar Light, and then your AK-47, which on the next slide you can see there fires a 7.62 by 39, and your M4, which it can fire both 223 and 5.56. The difference in those is minimal. The 223 is just a smaller round. It's less pressurized. So, for example, a 5.56 can safely shoot a 223. It won't be as good, but a 223 cannot fire a 5.56. It's going to cause some damage to that weapon, simply because it's a bigger round with more punch behind it. Now, for your most common firearms, these are the ones that everybody is going to have access to. It really doesn't even matter on their position or their department. Like, these are pretty much standard issue at this point. Your Glock 19 or your 9mm medium pistol, that's common standard issue. Remington Model 870, those are everywhere. And then finally, your M4 style carbine or your SBR, which is a short barreled rifle. It's a smaller, more compact version of the M4. Those are everywhere, and those are going to be your most common weapons.
Got it. Okay, so we've all seen it in the movies where the secret agent needs to take someone out and they need to do it discreetly, and they slip on the old silencer. Can you give us the real deal on, what suppression is all about?
Absolutely, yeah. So on this slide, you'll see two examples here. The one on the left is one you would typically see mounted on a rifle. Now, the common misconception with these is you can just screw a suppressor onto anything. That's not true. There has to be a mounting option. There has to be something for it to mount on. So we'll take the pistol on the right, the Glock on the right, for example. You'll see it has a little nub there at the end of the barrel that isn't on any of those others. That's what we call a threaded barrel. So that's a barrel where you can take the protector off and then screw on a suppressor onto the end of that weapon.
Gotcha.
Now with rifles, you have what are called muzzle brakes or flash hiders. The one on the left is a muzzle brake. The one on the right is a flash hider. And those you use those just every day to control recoil or to minimize the amount of flash that's coming out of your weapon when you fire. But those are also mounting options for suppressors. So you can really just take a suppressor, screw it on there, and it'll secure, and then now you've got a suppressed weapon. Now, when it comes to suppressors themselves, what is actually being suppressed? It's really two things, or one thing mainly. It's the gas. What makes a lot of the noise is the gas. When you've got something, when you're essentially creating an explosion inside of that weapon every single time, it certainly sounds like that. There's a lot of gas and there's a lot of powder that's being expelled. So what a suppressor does is it consists of baffles that will trap and give that gas and that all that material, a place to go and expand without coming out the end of the weapon. So it's going to contain a lot more of that violent, that violent exothermic explosive process.
Yeah.
And it's going to help control recoil. It's going to reduce your muzzle flash. It's going to be, increased accuracy, and it's going to make the sound a lot more manageable if you aren't wearing hearing protection. But it doesn't completely mask it. The other thing is, if you're firing a supersonic bullet, that bullet is still going to create a crack as it exits that weapon because it's going supersonic. It's breaking the sound barrier. You can use what's called subsonic ammunition. And so, and that's a twofer there, where if you've got a suppressed weapon firing subsonic, you are dealing with the gas that's coming out of that weapon. And so you're containing that noise source, but you're also mitigating that crack as that bullet travels, and breaks the sound barrier. And so it's going to be much more quieter. There are some weapons, we'll use the MP5 for an example, where it was so quiet with firing subsonic ammunition and having a suppressor that all you would really hear is the bolt on the weapon reciprocating. That was
interesting.
It.
So
Very,
the
quiet.
movies aren't really lying in certain instances that you can get it very, very quiet.
You can, but you need to be firing a very small caliber at subsonic speeds. And so, but don't forget, you're sacrificing velocity at that point, and velocity is critical to threat neutralization.
Gotcha.
When it comes to decibel levels, right, 140 dB is considered a hearing safe level according to OSHA. And for an M4 rifle firing unsuppressed, that's about 165 decibels. It's pretty loud.
Yeah.
A jackhammer is 130. A jet taking off is 150, and a rifle is firing at 165.
Wow.
Now, what a suppressor will do, though, it'll bring that level down to where if you're firing a suppressed rifle, a suppressed M4, it's down to about 134 decibels. Still louder than a jackhammer. So keep that in mind. Same with a pistol. Pistol unsuppressed, pretty loud, but with a suppressor on there, it's down to 125, which is louder than thunder. So what a suppressor is really designed to do is to make it more difficult for someone to pin down a direction for when that gunfire is coming from and make it less recognizable as a gunshot. It's not meant to completely obscure and mitigate all sound that originates from firing a weapon. It's really just mask direction, mask the fact that it's a gunshot.
So I'm sure that there are a lot of misconceptions about firearms from popular media and fiction. What's something only an experienced gunner would know?
All right, so yeah, we'll kind of run down a list here. So federal agents and law enforcement can carry just about everywhere these days, thanks to the Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act, which was a congressional act to ensure that law enforcement officers could carry pretty much anywhere, including on planes. As long as you've gone through some kind of flying while armed training, you could carry on a plane while flying. Civilians, however, can't. So you got to make sure you know your local gun laws, especially if your handler is all about verisimilitude and realism.
Yeah.
And if they're looking up the local gun laws, you need to be too, so you don't get yourself in trouble. Shooters may develop calluses on the web of their dominant hand, the one that's all the way high up on that grip, and on the knuckle of their middle finger, which rests kind of just under the trigger guard, due to that constant contact and friction that comes with a lot of shooting.
That makes sense.
Experienced shooters tend to not flinch as much, if at all, when they're firing, especially when you're just starting out. Like, you're going to flinch. You're going to be surprised and shocked every time that gun goes off.
Yeah.
But folks who have been doing it a lot, they tend to flinch barely at all, if any. Shooting a firearm inside without a suppressor or hearing protection is going to cause severe hearing damage and loss. It not might cause it, it will cause it. You are going to walk away with some form of hearing damage. It's going to happen.
Yeah, how, we talked about this a little bit with Shane, but like, how strict should we be about this as handlers? If the players are in an apartment complex versus like a cement room, where is the line here where we should be a little more strict about something like this?
Oh man, it just depends on how deep down the rabbit hole you want to go on this, and how savage you want to be with your players.
Yeah,
I probably wouldn't. But if it comes up and it's, and also it depends on the environment, right? Shooting an unsuppressed weapon inside a room where there's a lot of furniture, a lot of carpeting, curtains, all of that helps to absorb sound. So it's definitely not going to be as bad as shooting it in a bare concrete stairwell.
Right.
So it handlers fiat, but yeah, I mean, if you really want to hammer them for shooting indoors unsuppressed, you could. Yeah, you can't hear anything for the next 1d12 hours. So.
Yeah, it just seems like, as we've done our research here, that this is very much a reality, and I don't often see it broached in games like Delta Green, so it's something that folks have to really consider and maybe homebrew it, a rule.
Absolutely. Yeah. If it were me, if I was going to implement this tonight, I would say, you fired a weapon unsuppressed inside, you have lost your hearing, and for the next 1d12 hours, and all of your alertness checks, unless you roll a critical, are a failure. Something like that. Yeah, or audio-based alertness checks.
Right.
Spent and burnt gunpowder has a very unique smell that can really only be described as gunpowdery. Everyone has a very different description. The most common ones I've heard have been acrid, metallic, maybe a bit, but not quite like sulfur or fireworks. A lot of folks tend to say, the smell of cordite hung in the air. Cordite's no longer used in modern gunpowder. So it's really just that very acrid, metallic, kind of smoky smell to it. And as we mentioned, suppressors do not completely silence a gunshot. They just make it less easily identifiable as one and more difficult to determine the exact direction it originated from.
Got it.
When we're talking about sound, your bullets will crack because they're going supersonic. They're breaking that sound barrier, but they whiz. Like they're gonna whiz through the air when they're close. When you're hearing that whiz, that very sharp sound, you need to get to cover because you're being shot at.
Gotcha.
Adrenaline and the fight or flight response can be both your best friend and your worst enemy. You'll get what's called tunnel vision. You'll hyper focus on what's immediately in front of you, and you'll lose up to 70% of your peripheral vision, simply because what's happening is that your body's going through that fight or flight, and so it's redirecting blood flow. It's shutting down redundant systems, and it's focusing only on what's necessary for survival. So the body's going to hyper focus in on that immediate threat in front of you. You will also potentially experience auditory exclusion. You'll be unable to hear nearby voices or sounds. There have been reports of people who have been in gunfights and they couldn't hear somebody right next to them shouting their own name.
Wow.
And this could be a method through which that hearing loss is mitigated, because they have found that people who experience auditory exclusion did not have as severe hearing loss after the gunfight.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then you'll also lose your fine motor skills, potentially. That occurs when the heart rate exceeds 115 beats per minute, because between 115 and 160, the blood flow is being redirected from the extremities to your major organs, and you're going to lose some of that fine dexterity. Typically, these effects are mitigated just through intense physical training and conditioning and psychological awareness of what to expect, and that's what's referred to as stress inoculation.
Interesting. So even if as a handler you don't want to punish the players too much when they fail their firearms rolls when they're in the middle of combat, you can use this as an example of why they're missing, because their fine motor skills are just being tested to the limits, and their heart rate is just bringing their blood flow to other places.
And then finally, we have got to talk about cover and concealment.
Yeah.
You are not flipping a wooden park bench or picnic table and taking cover behind that. That is concealment. Cover protects you from incoming fire. How effective the cover is going to depend on the weapon shooting at you. So good examples: brick or cement walls, vehicle engine blocks. You get down behind an SUV, behind the engine block, it's pretty good cover. Large natural features like boulders, thick oak trees. We'll use this graphic on the right. Somebody with a pistol a gun safe works, a bookcase works, a refrigerator, a water heater, the couch and the chair, the wall, not so much because it's drywall.
Yeah.
Concealment just protects you from being observed. That doesn't protect you from gunfire. It just protects somebody from being able to see you. So that includes literally everything else, to include drywall, wooden tables, car doors. Car doors don't stop anything. They may redirect the bullet, but they don't stop the bullet. In the example below, you've got an individual with a rifle, and really the only thing that's going to be effective cover is that gun safe because it's just thick metal.
Yeah.
That's it. That's going to punch through everything else.
So good to remember that it's not like the movies where you can just hide behind anything and be okay. You need to find those things that are actually going to stop or redirect the bullets.
Absolutely. It's got to be big. It's got to be heavy.
Yeah. Vince, last episode you said that you didn't often give players handouts, but you are more than making up for it this year because you've already produced 2 standout handouts. First there was Investigations 101, and now this, the Guns of Delta Green. So thank you for all of this work. I think this is really going to help players and handlers.
I hope it does. No, thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate that. And if you all found that useful, please let us know in the comments. We'll keep stuff like this coming. I have one more guide I want to try to get written by the end of the year, all about tradecraft and essentially covering up your mess and cleaning up after yourselves, called The Cover Up, a guide to redacting the truth in Delta Green. Hopefully we can get that out soon.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. And just so everyone understands, this, what we've been showing you, these slides and whatnot, will be available in PDF and PowerPoint for you to download and to give to your teams and your players to help everyone understand how firearms works.
Absolutely.
So that is it for this episode, gang. If you've got questions or topics that you want to hear, let us know about it in the comments below. Don't forget to check out our Patreon at patreon.com/MaydayRP, where you can get access to extended versions of this and every Dead Drop episode. Last episode, I had to cut a lot of good bits out. So if you're ever vibing with an episode and you like the topic at hand, know that by joining our Patreon at the $5 level, you will get access to a lot more information on the topic. But until then, everyone, please stay safe, and we'll see you next month.
See you, everybody.